Hi, welcome to the video. As you can probably tell from the thumbnail and the title, this is not a normal video in this channel where, usually I will talk about math. Instead, I'm going to talk about books. I try to read as much as probably, most people do, try to read a little bit. I will try to read about a book a month, usually, before this year at least. And then I'd probably fail and I'd get to maybe 8 or in a year. I think last year I read 14, which was pretty good. And then at the start of this year, I kind of had this realization that, I think, because I used to read a lot when I was a kid, and I had this sort of thought that maybe I've read more books than I'll read for the rest of my life, even though I'm not presumably halfway through my life, hopefully. And I was like, that's kind of sad, and then I had this thought that, I'm totally in charge of that. I don't need to just, resign myself to not reading for the rest of my life. Like, I can just read more books if I want to. So this year I went really off the wall. I read 72 books. There's a mix of some nonfiction in there, but mostly they're fiction. And so, I guess I could have, separated them into nonfiction and fiction, but I thought I'd just do them all together. And there's so few nonfiction in there that really, it's fine. I'll just compare everything against everything else. And yeah, I think I do usually enjoy nonfiction books slightly less, so they might be a little bit lower. This is just my opinion, and I don't want to sort of like declare any of this this ranking as any kind of objective truth or anything, and I don't want to disparage books. I don't want to claim that any books have some kind of objective value over others, or that some books have no objective value. I think all books are, barring like super offensive ones, are have value as an art form and stuff. So anyway, I just want to put that out. But yeah, I'm gonna. So as you can see, I've done the little tier thingy. From Omega Poggers, which is the best, to Regrets, which is the least, which is the worst. And yeah, there's honestly not that many books that I finished this year that I regretted reading, but I guess at least that I remember. But we'll go through and see. And yeah, and I'll just rank them. So I have a drink. I guess it wouldn't be a booktube video without a warm drink of some kind. So I will take a sip and then get started. Okay, so the first book is The Nick Adams Stories by Ernest Hemingway. And this is a book of short stories. A collection of short stories from various different previous collections, I guess, that all feature the same main character, Nick Adams. And if you don't know, Nick Adams is kind of the character that Ernest Hemingway will use when he's writing a story that's quite autobiographical. A lot of his work is autobiographical, but these are like specifically autobiographical. And this is the collection of all of them. And I really did like this book. Yeah, there were some previously unpublished works in here too. There's one called The Last Good Country, I'm just looking at it here, that I think was supposed to be the start of a novel, or was supposed to be some kind of novella, or novel, and it was just never finished. And I guess I didn't really know that, or I wasn't paying attention in the introduction or something, but I got really excited kind of to see what would happen, and it just ends like kind of abruptly. So that's a little disappointing. It was good enough that I was kind of wondering what would happen, so maybe it's not disappointing. It's also interesting that for something that's supposed to be autobiographical, that story has quite a lot of like ancestral vibes between Nick Adams and his sister. So I don't really know what Ernest was trying to say about his own life there, but anyway, the stories are all really good. I've read some of them before, from In Our Time, I think, is what I read, that had Nick Adams stories in them. So let me just look at the contents. Big Two-Hearted River is really good. What else? There's The Last Good Country. There's like the early ones, like Three Shots, and I think it's Indian Camp, that I thought were really good when I read them in Our Time, and they're in here as well. So I think this is a good book. I would definitely recommend it. I thought these would be in order, but they're not. So I'm gonna have to search for it every time. I don't think it's Omega Poggers. I think it's recommended, but like towards the top of recommended. I do really like these. Maybe it's not the best first short story collection, because it's really just a lot of the same character. So maybe if you're new to Ernest Hemingway short stories, I would recommend, In Our Time is really good. Okay, I'm just gonna throw them on the floor when I'm done with them. So the second book that I read this year is a history book. So this is one of the nonfiction books that I read, and it's a history of Singapore. I come from Singapore. I was born there, though I grew up in Canada. And so I thought it would be really cool to read a history book about Singapore that isn't like endorsed by the school board or whatever. Like when I was young, my mom did go home to Singapore and like get us Singapore social studies books just in case we would ever go back to Singapore, which is a super, tiger mom sort of thing to do, but whatever. I did read those books and it was kind of interesting. But it's interesting. I say interesting a lot. It was like nice to read this kind of from a fresh perspective, one that's not sort of endorsed by the ruling government. If you don't know, Singapore has only ever had one government. It's not necessarily like super dictatorial or anything, because it is a democracy, but there has only been one government, and they're a little bit authoritarian, and they do kind of tell the history of Singapore from that lens. So it was nice to read this book, which is, it is written by a British person, so it's kind of from an outside perspective. But, given that I have read a lot of Singapore history from the inside perspective, it was kind of cool to read it from the outside one. So I thought this was, I'm going to say it's okay. Like, it's still a history book. It's kind of boring. It took me like a couple weeks to get through. But it's interesting, and it's definitely niche. Like it's okay, and I would maybe bump it up to recommend if you're like Singaporean or you're maybe moving to Singapore and you want to educate yourself about the history. But other than that, it's just okay. So third is The Prodigy by Hermann Hesse. One of my favorite books that I've read recently, I think like my favorite book that I have read in like the last 2-3 years is Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. And I was a little bit, this is just a downer. It's really just a downer of a book. So it's about, it says, this novel is Hermann Hesse's indictment of conventional education. So it was written in, I think, the 20s or 30s, a long time ago. And already then he was talking about, I'm not sure if it's already or now thing, but the kind of over-education of kids and how it can kind of mess you up. And sort of just a personal thing, I was also going through like interviews for a PhD at the time while I was reading this book. It's kind of like, it was all kind of hitting me at that time, the stress of PhD interviews and then reading this book, which is like really critical of education. And really, the education system hasn't changed too much since when Hermann Hesse, wrote this book, especially when it comes to like higher education and, the pursuit of knowledge and stuff like that. So it's a bit of a downer. I want to say like, I don't know if I liked it. Like, it's not a bad book. I definitely like didn't fully, like it kind of just made me sad at some points, and I might have just been in like the wrong time of my life to be reading it, or maybe the perfect time of my life, I don't know. But let's find it. Also, it's really annoying that I like numbered the JPEGs thinking they would appear in that order, and then they just appear in whatever order that they want, so I'm going to look for it. So I finally found it. It is here. Well, I put it at the top. Yeah, I'm going to put it in either okay or meh. Like, meh, kind of, because I don't remember too much about it, except just the emotional. Well, I remember the ending. And you know what? I'm going to put it in okay. Yeah. But like towards the bottom of okay. It was probably like my least favorite of the Hermann Hesse books that I've read. But it's still Hermann Hesse. I really like the author, and it was still a good book. So the next book on the list is The Mathematical Magpie. I got this in Mexico when I was there. I just saw it like for a couple of pesos in a used book sort of bin thing. And it was in English. It was one of the only English books there, so I thought I would get it, and plus I'm really into math. And this is an interesting concept. It's called The Mathematical Magpie because I guess Clifton Fadiman, the person who collected all these stories and poems and stuff, kind of feels that he's a bit of a magpie. Like he's interested in math clearly, and I guess he reads all sorts of literary magazines or short story collections and finds stories that have something to do with math. Maybe it's like some topological concept is used, and sometimes it's a little bit it's used not always super accurately. Like science fiction doesn't always use science super accurately, and so math fiction, I guess, doesn't always use math accurately, but it's all in good fun. And there was a story called Star Bright that I remember liking. Yeah, I thought it was fun. This was a fun, like now that I look at it, I don't really remember that many of the stories. So maybe it ought to go into meh for that reason. Yeah, I think like meh or bottom of okay. I think meh. Yeah, it's recommended to only people who are like super into math. Sorry, just check. So next on the list is the Arabian Nights, and this is the translation by Burton, something Burton. It's really old. Like this is probably the oldest book that I own. It's got to be at least 100 years old. It smells old, and it's like kind of falling apart. Yeah, I started this book not in 2022. I think I started it in last year, 2021, and then I like got partway into it and then forgot about it for a long time. And then I just picked up where I was and I continued because it's ultimately like there is a frame story. I'm sure most of you know about the sort of frame story of Arabian Nights. So there's a princess, Shahrazad, who is, I guess, captured by this king who is going to kill her. And on the night before she's about to be killed, she starts telling him a story. And at the end, she leaves him on a cliffhanger so that he won't kill her. You have to wait till the next night to hear the next part of the story. So it's really a collection of short stories that are not really related, but there's that frame story, and it's super old stories from Arabia, I guess. And yeah, I didn't really honestly like the translation. I think the translator took some kind of classical Arabic, like medieval Arabic, and then translated it to sort of medieval English or early modern English. And the result is that there's all these thous and these everywhere, and it's written in a convoluted way, but in a way that's, I guess, artificial because this was translated in the late 1800s. So it's not even like it was translated from medieval Arabic to medieval English by someone who was speaking medieval English. It's kind of artificially done, and it just kind of gets in the way, I feel. Like I would not recommend this translation to anyone, like kids today or something, and definitely not to kids actually, because I mean, honestly, like it's kind of not appropriate. Like a lot of the stories are very violent, or there's like sex and stuff in there. I think it like caused a big stir in Victorian England at the time. So it's like not really for kids. This is not like the Arabian Nights that is like Aladdin has been, obviously edited a lot to be more kid friendly and honestly to just be like a tighter story and stuff. But it was still cool to, like, from a historical standpoint, to read this. I still think I'm gonna put it in like meh, if I can find it. Okay, it's right here. Yeah, it's gonna go in meh. I think, I don't know. Yeah, I think I like the Mathematical Magpie a little more. Okay, so next on the list is Mother Night. You'll just have to look at this little icon thing because I don't have the book. I borrowed it from, oh no, I bought it, but then I immediately lent it right after I read it to, I think, my friend Steve. I really like this book. So this, well, I say I really liked it, but I think I might put it in okay, or it's definitely recommended. Like, I really like the book. It's about a Nazi sympathizer, I guess, like an American who worked with the Nazis. It's told from, I think, his point of view, if I'm not wrong, or at least like it focuses on him and just kind of all the ethical dilemmas and everything. And it's satire, and it kind of, I don't know, I thought it was just really good, like when I read it, and I think it might be one of my, like, I don't remember too much about it, like the actual plot itself. I just remember it being quite clever, and I think I would have to reread it once I get it back from my friend. like all Kurt Vonnegut books, I think that it's just really nice to pick one up and like open to a random part, especially if you already know the plot, and just like read the line level, because the words, I mean, the way he tells the story is just so funny. I think I just really like his writing style. Even if the plots themselves, I find are like sometimes they're so out there. Like I just right after I read it, I can't even explain to you like what exactly happened. There's like aliens and stuff. This one didn't actually. I'm not wrong. This one didn't actually have aliens, but okay. So next is the Sirens of Titan, which I think is this one. Yeah, it doesn't look like the one version I read, but I think it's Sirens of Titan. This is the correct cover. Yeah, so I think I'm also gonna recommend this one. It was also really good. Like I said, I often like come out of the plots like not fully remembering what exactly happened point to point, but they're these like there's this like rich couple. There's this guy Malachi, Constance, and there's like this journey, and they uncover this plot by like, and there's aliens. You know, there's kind of a plot, and like the entirety of the human race is sort of at stake. I don't want to spoil too much, but yeah. And it's just completely absurd, but does it does try to say something about it's absurd, but in a way kind of is trying to convey the absurdity of human society. I think like that's what I got out of it, at least. Yeah. I think you can maybe tell that I'm not very literary. I read books for fun, and I'm from a math background, not a English literature background. So maybe my analyses are a little shallow. But I can tell you what I liked, and maybe what you'll like from some of these books. Okay, so the next book was Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, and there's other stories in here too, and I read all of them. But the most important one is Heart of Darkness, I think, and the most famous one, and the reason why I read it. Yeah, I liked it kind of. I mean, honestly, like it was a little bit like it felt very colonial in a way that wasn't like. I mean, it's from that time. It's not. I guess it was critical of colonialism, maybe not like to the certain extent. Like it is critical of colonialism, I think. This is it follows someone going into the Belgian Congo back in I think pre-1900, and like going in and coming out, meeting someone who was in there for a while, living with the inhabitants of the land. And yeah, it's like I think it is critical of colonialism, but like it also suffers from some amount of like racism, just like in the text itself, that maybe isn't like it's still I think it's an important story and one that's worth reading. I wasn't like necessarily Kurtz is the person he's looking for. Anyway, I wasn't necessarily like hooked all the way in. I don't think it's like even the best just story. Like I think it's like important, and that's why people recommend it. It's like important historically, but as a story to just read, I wasn't super just like enthralled. There's other stories in here too. There's one that's set in like Malaya, which I thought was interesting, being from Singapore. So it's set in colonial, like British Malaya. And there's another one also set in Africa called An Outpost of Progress. That honestly, like I found that one more memorable than Heart of Darkness, like in terms of what happened. So yeah, like this is the book that I have. It's the Heart of Darkness and Other Tales. I don't know if you're gonna be able to find exactly this one, but I thought it was okay. I'm gonna put okay. So next on the list is Nanjing 1937. I borrowed this from my friend Steve, and I thought this was fun. It's a romance book about this professor. I forget his name. I forget characters' names. He's a professor, and he falls in love with a I can't remember if she's a student, but she's definitely like a lot younger than him, and she is sort of in like in like Nanjing high society, and this is all on against the backdrop of the war, and so he's like really kind of down bad for this girl, and he like will do anything for her. Like it's a comedy. It's a comedy, but I mean, as you can probably guess, this is set in the war, and it's 1937 is when the Japanese were invading China, and so there's some tragedy in there too. I think it was fun. Like the writing was not that great, if I remember correctly. Like, it's translated from Chinese, and I'm not sure the translation was like, I felt like some of the writing felt like simplistic, almost like childish. I don't know. Uh, so the writing wasn't that great, but and I don't know if it's a translation or if it's the actual writing, but the plot was really funny. So and just fun. I think it's like very much at the top of okay. Next we have Shoveling Trouble. I actually have this one, so it's here by Mordecai Richler. This is gonna go in meh, and maybe not like, yeah, it's gonna go at like the top of meh, because I thought it was a book of short stories. It's not a book of short stories. It's a book of essays, and I guess I just really wasn't looking for a book of essays. So really, it's not necessarily this book's fault, but I did read it, and it had like observations about being a writer and about Montreal, which is where I lived for 5 years and will continue to live when I start my PhD. And yeah, I thought like it was meh. Now we get to one that is actually, I think it's the first Omega Poggers. I hope you know what that means. If you don't, it just means like really good in like young people speak. Yeah, where is it? It's a different cover. Yeah, it's here. Yeah, it's gonna go up there. It's just so good. Like I kind of really got into short stories this year. It started a little bit last year when I read like In Our Time. I read an Atwood collection of short stories. And so I was kind of more open to short stories this year. That's why I started the year with reading the Nick Adams stories. But I kind of went looking for collections of short stories this year. And this is Alice Munro's first collection of short stories from 1960 something, 1968, I think. Let me see, 1968. So it's her first collection, and they're just really, really good. Like, I think the first one, like Walker Brothers Cowboy, is just like, it's just so sad. It's about a little girl who follows her dad, along with her little brother, follows her dad on, he's like a traveling salesman, or like times are rough. I don't think he was originally a traveling salesman, but he is now a traveling salesman, and they go into the countryside and they meet this woman. And I'm not going to spoil who the woman is, but it's just a really sad story, and it's told like retrospectively. So I guess like Alice Munro must have been about, I think, 40 by the time she published this book. And it's her first collection. And so a lot of the stories are about like childhood, but told from a perspective of someone older. Yeah, so that was really good. Shining Houses. Yeah. An Ounce of Cure was kind of, yeah, I think that one was about a teenager and drinking. Then The Time of Death, that one was sad. Day of the Butterfly is like super, super sad. Boys and Girls was yeah, Boys and Girls was good. Boys and Girls reminded me of the kind of stories I would have read in high school, although we didn't read that story in high school. And then the title story, Dance of the Happy Shades, is really good. It's about a piano recital. Wait, this is like super highly recommended. I really like Dance of the Happy Shades. So next is The Dance Is One by F.R. Scott. And I don't have this book because I borrowed it from my friend Jonah. It's a book of poetry. You know what? Okay, I'm just gonna leave it here for now, and I'm just gonna actually, for the first time, like Google, just to like look at the poems. Okay, it like wasn't that easy to find a list of the poems. It seems to be kind of an obscure book. But anyway, I think this was the one. I remember there was like a really long poem, or it wasn't one poem. It was at least multiple poems that like were linked about going on the Mackenzie River and meeting like the people who lived up there along the way. So a lot of them are like working in an industrial context, there without their families. A lot of them were indigenous, or I don't know if they were Inuit people, as you get all the way to like the ocean, but yeah, just kind of that I thought was like really cool, like an epic sort of poem. Like, it's not super long, but it felt like epic, and just like kind of poignant interactions with people. That was like super memorable. The rest, like, I guess I don't remember too much. There was like, yeah, there are some funny ones. Like there was one like that I remember. Like, this is definitely in like recommended, or at least the top of okay. There were some funny ones. Like there was a one about the Coca-Cola company or something. Like, it was a joke. Like, the whole poem was a joke, and the punchline was the Coca-Cola company, and I thought that was funny, and I still remember that. So if you can track this down, I recommend it Yeah, bottom of recommended, actually. Let's put it here. So next on the list is Wilderness Tips by Margaret Atwood. It's a collection of short stories. And I liked them. They were good. Once again, not all of them are super, super memorable. I think Wilderness Tips is the one at a summer camp. Or maybe not. Maybe, okay. So they're not that memorable in that I don't remember most of them, but I do remember some of the good ones. And no, Wilderness Tips is not. I think it's True Trash. Yeah, it's True Trash. I think it's the opening story was like I didn't remember the title, but I do remember the plot, and that was like pretty. It was pretty interesting. Like it spans kind of quite a lot of time, which I like about Alice Munro short stories. Like a lot of short stories generally like focus on one event, right? It's rare to find a short story that kind of talks about a long period of time or has like a big time skip and like does it well. I think that story, if I remember correctly, does do it well. It's about a bunch of people at summer camp and like stuff that happened during that summer camp, and then it explores kind of the consequences later on too. The hairball was like kind of gross. And then to be honest, I don't remember too many of them. The Bog Man was interesting. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna put this in okay, actually. Like her writing is good, but in retrospect, I didn't remember even too many of the stories. So it's gonna go in okay. Maybe above Heart of Darkness. Next is Dear Life by Alice Munro. So I started with the first Munro book, and then I ended with the last one. Or I mean, the next one, sorry, I did, was the last one. And yeah, you can definitely tell there's a difference in style. This is written in 2012, so Munro is probably like 70 or 80 by the time she wrote this. And yeah, what were my favorite stories in here? Corey was really good. Train is really good. Train's really long and also really good. And then, yeah, the rest maybe not as memorable. So yeah, this is gonna go, I think, like the bottom of recommend. Yeah, bottom of recommend, maybe. Maybe more than the poem book. Maybe more than the dance one. Okay, but like really good. I mean, I like Alice Munro's books. They're very like subdued, very, they talk about everyday life, but focus on like little details of everyday life, kind of like the sort of like the little, like honestly talks a lot about like little regrets, or when you tell a story, like a lot of them are told by an older person about, times before, and kind of focuses on like a little regret, or like, and like just social interactions in small town Canada. Like all the stories are in like small town Canada. Like she doesn't write about things that she doesn't understand super like just have an insanely precise understanding of. And what she has an insanely precise understanding of is like small town Canada. And I think, yeah, this is a really good collection of short stories. Next is V by Kim Thuy. I think that's how you pronounce the name, Thui. This is a story about Vietnamese immigrants to Montreal. I think it's slightly autobiographical. I don't know. I suspect it is, but I don't know. And yeah, it's in French. It's the first French book I've read in a very long time, and I don't know if maybe like I'm just not that good at reading French or something. But yeah, I like thought it was okay. It's a little short, honestly. Like I guess my complaint is that it maybe feels like a series of vignettes more than a novel. It really does kind of capture the. Well, I don't really know. Like I've never been a refugee, right? Immigrant, but I am an immigrant, and it does capture some of that. Like moving to a new country, moving to Canada as a kid, and then there's just some scenes in here that are not relatable because I have never, like not relatable, but like just absolutely devastating, like the boat people and stuff. Yeah, it's gonna go in okay. I think maybe, yeah, maybe like here. Yeah, it's good. Maybe I would have enjoyed it more in English, honestly, but like I do read French like fine. Maybe I just need to read a little slower and stuff like that, and that might have gotten in the way of my maybe I should reread it or something at some point. But it was definitely an interesting book. Okay, then this is another very like immigrant book that I really really like. So this isn't gonna go up here. I remember really liking it at the time. Like I read this book in one day, and I was supposed to be like running errands, and I was packing to go on a trip. Um, I was supposed to be like, kind of doing errands all day. I took this book out to read on the bus, and then in the end, like when I was done my errand, before I got onto the bus, I just sat at the bus stop, not even getting on the bus, like reading the book, and then I read it on the bus, and then I got off the bus stop, and I didn't even go home. I sat in a park, and I finished the whole book. So like I really liked it. Like sort of my initial just reaction to the book is that like this is the best book I've read this year. Now that I think about it, like maybe it was like maybe I was just having like a knee jerk reaction that it was like super super good. But you know, I think it like they are good stories. My favorite one is Randy Travis. It's about immigrants and the mom really likes the country singer Randy Travis, and kind of that's obviously a setup for a deeper story, but yeah, I really liked that story. I thought it was really cute and quite sad. And Paris is about someone who is thinking about getting a nose job and like kind of contemplating how much that would like what effect that would have in her life. And I think she works in a chicken factory or something, a chicken processing plant. So anyway, they're really good stories, and I really do recommend this book. It's one of two books in the Omega Poggers category at the moment, so it's really one of my favorite books of the year. So next is Glorious Frazzled Beings, another collection of short stories by Angélique Lalonde, and this was like there's more like magical. Well, it's magical realism, which I'm not sure. I think I just don't really like the genre so much. The writing is fine, and there were definitely still some like good memorable ideas in here. But yeah, like I'm not sure I like really liked all the like it's really just weird. Maybe it's not the genre. Maybe these stories are actually just weird. Some of them I just like read and I had no idea like what was going on or what was like I don't know. So there's one like called Mom's Online Dating Profile where the mom dies and then like she's pretty old, and then the protagonist looks through the mom's dating profile, which is an interesting idea, I guess. There's like some of them are kind of spooky, like and just weird, like Lady with the Big Head Chronicle. Now I remember this. Like this is just weird. I'm not sure I understood what it was trying to do, but maybe that's just me. But anyway, I think it's definitely a solid like meh. I'm gonna give it a solid meh. Where is this book? Right here. Yeah, it's gonna go in meh, like top of meh. Okay, the writing is good. I want to like stress. I think the writing was actually really good. Just like I'm not sure I like vibed with all of the story ideas, or even understood many of them. Yeah. There's one Puka. Puka was good. It's about a guy who like collects carpets. If I'm not wrong. There's also one about like two sons, and one of them is like prettier than the other in some way, but like in some magical way. I think no, one of them has ears and the other one doesn't, like fox ears or something. Is it? Yes, one of them has fox ears and the other one doesn't. And like, how does the one without the fox ears feel about that? I guess I do remember like some of the vague emotional um, points of that story. Okay, anyway, it's a meh from me. Okay, so this Slaughterhouse-Five is a really good book. I read this in one day as well. I was traveling with my dad in Ecuador, and we were just like doing altitude acclimatization. So the point was just to go somewhere high and sit around and rest to get ready for a mountain climb. And so I had a lot of time to just sit and read. And so I read this book in like one day. And it's about the firebombing of Dresden, which I think was done by the Allied troops near the end of World War II. And Kurt Vonnegut, the author, the real person, was actually there. And so this is like a very Vonnegut retelling of it, which obviously is going to involve like aliens and stuff. And yeah, it was just a really, really good book. and really like, yeah, just like thought provoking, like the consequences of war, or like the causes and consequences of war. And it's like thought provoking in a way like maybe like a Farewell to Arms or something isn't. Like they all kind of deal with very personal retelling of war, but this is a bit more like scathing in a way. Like it's funny. It's like it's a funny book. Farewell to Arms is kind of like I compare the Farewell to Arms because I read them kind of in similar times, and one is about World War One, the other one's about World War Two. But this is like scathing. Like it's very critical of war, but not in a way that like it just jokes about it. It's almost like a coping. It really felt like, I'm sure there's some truth to this. Like it felt like the person who wrote this was trying to cope with um something really horrible that happened to so many people and that he was very much involved in, and he was coping with it through humor. And I guess Catch-22 might be similar. Like if there's a book that's similar to this, it's got to be probably like Catch-22. Though this is a lot less. It's told in linear order, and it's a lot less. Yeah, it's like more of a focused story. So it's a bit like Catch-22. I liked it. It goes in Omega Poggers. I think it's maybe. I like the order that I put so far. Next is Narcissus and Goldmund by Hermann Hesse, and it follows Narcissus, who's kind of a teacher to Goldmund, but not much older, and then Goldmund, who's the pupil, and kind of Narcissus is okay. So the school is a religious school, and I guess Narcissus kind of believes that Goldmund needs to go off into the world and like explore all facets of life to really connect with to like really connect with himself, I guess, a bit like Siddhartha. It kind of is an exploration of, do you have to like sin to know virtue or to become virtuous, kind of like that. That's kind of what I feel. Oh my god, and now I'm remembering like things that happened in here. Like it's pretty, like it's a good book. Like I'm remembering things that happened now. Like there's a there's a plague and stuff. Like it was a good book. I'm going to put it in recommended. Where is the book? Narcissus and Goldmund. It is in recommended. It's gonna go here. Yeah, I'm gonna put Dear Life actually like above the Vonnegut. So next is Runaway, another Alice Munro book, and I guess there's gonna be a lot of Alice Munro up top, but this is definitely Omega Poggers. I think it's the top. It's probably the best book I've read this year. The stories are longer. I think there's only 8 stories in this, like rather thick book, or like thickish book, as far as short story collections go, I guess. So they're kind of longer stories, and 3 of them are actually related. So there's Chance, Soon, and Silence are related, and like they're just really, these are like expertly crafted stories. I think like I guess I can talk about like literally all of them. Hang on. There's like 8 stories. The first one is about Runaway. So there's like a couple who lives in a trailer park, and then I think like the woman is involved in some way. I think she works for a rich lady who lives nearby. I guess on an acreage near their trailer park is my understanding of the situation. And yeah, there's like a run. They also have a pet goat, and the pet goat runs away. Really, it's about the relationship between the people in the trailer park, but yeah. Okay. Anyway, Chance, Soon, and Silence are all focused on the same. They all focus on the same character, Juliet. Chance is when she's like 20 something, 22, I think, and she falls in love with a much older man. Soon is when, I think Soon is about her as a young mother. Kind of, it explores sort of the relationship between her and her own mother, and then like how like she is wants to raise her own child. And then Silence is, now she's a lot older, and her daughter is grown up, and sort of, yeah, like they're all standalone stories, but the last one like really hits home like when you read the other two, because kind of like, how do you like, there's all these traits that you admire in Juliet, in Chance and Soon, that maybe don't make her into a very good mother. And so like, yeah, um, that sounds good. Okay, so then passion, trespasses, tricks, and powers. If there's one that I didn't really like, it's powers. I'm not sure I even really understand what happened. Like, it felt like there was magic in there, and I'm not really sure if the magic was supposed to be like actually magical or if there was like a thing that I missed. Maybe I was just dumb. I'll definitely have to reread that one. Um, one of these. Oh, tricks. Yeah, I remember tricks. There's like a plot twist at the end. Trespasses is about an adopted girl, I think, and passion. Oh, passion is about a girl who like also falls in love with an older man. Like, yeah, okay. It like, I feel like when I say all the plot points out, like it's just like mundane things. But like I like assure you, these are like so well written. I feel like even if they seem like the plots feel like cheesy romance fiction you might find at the library, like in that section that usually avoid. It's really not like that. Like the writing is just so like candid and um like kind of poignant, that I don't know. Like I really have to recommend Runaway by Alice Munro. I think it's my favorite Munro collection. Okay, so next one we're gonna go. The next two are poem books of poetry, and this was Beast at Every Threshold um, well, by Natalie Wee, who is Singaporean, I think, or hang on, Singaporean or Malaysian. Let me just check. Born in Singapore to Malaysian parents. Okay, so both, but from Toronto, and yeah, so I thought it was like I just wanted to read. I saw this at the store and I was like, oh, a Singaporean author. I'll just read. And there's a couple poems in here that I liked. There's one called Sayang, which is like Sayang means like love in Malay, but there's a connotation that isn't really captured, I think, in English. Like maybe like cherish is a good word. I don't know. It actually has multiple. There's actually multiple meanings of Sayang. Now that I think about it. And I think the poem actually kind of goes through all of them. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I tried to get into poetry, but this year it's just like me maybe, but I'm not like the biggest fan of poetry. I sometimes just feel like I don't get the poems. Actually, most of the time I just feel like I don't get poetry. And that's something I've been working on. I'm gonna continue to try and read poetry, but um, yeah. So I guess I can't really like just super recommend books. I just feel like I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to poetry, so I don't want to say too much. Honestly, like this is okay. It's okay. It's a poetry book. I'm gonna put it above a history book. There we go. Cool. Yeah. And then another poetry book, which I actually lost. I have no idea where this is. I'm sure I moved in like August and I was sure I had it, but I just couldn't find it just now. And that is Crush. This is recommended. I think I'm still gonna put it in okay, just because. Um, no, it's like it's close to the dances one. Maybe it's around the dances one. Like these are poetry. This is like these are poems that I like felt something reading, and um, yeah. I wish I had it in front of me so I could just remind myself about the poems. I think there was one that I remember was about these brothers going on a motorcycle trip or something. That's like one I distinctly remember. Yeah, I do remember liking these poems. That's all I can really say about that because I don't have the book in front of me, and of course I forget everything. So the next book is Sunshine Sketches of a Little Town by Stephen Leacock, and the name caught my eye because there's a Leacock building at McGill, which is like everyone has had a class in Leacock because it's the biggest lecture hall, and yeah, it turns out he's a great Canadian satirist, I guess, and like short story writer, and these were all really funny, and I'm gonna put this high. Yeah, it's gonna go up here. I just did not expect to like these stories as much as I did. Like I read a lot of sad things. I read a lot of like drama sort of short stories. I was like, this is funny stuff, maybe a little like frivolous. Like, no, not at all. Like, okay, yes, frivolous, but just legitimately so clever and so enjoyable to read. Um, like I think the standout one is the one where there's a boat that goes into, yeah, the marine excursion of the Knights of Pythias is like just I think the standout one. But yeah, The Extraordinary Entanglement of Mr. Pupkin, I think was, if I, or maybe it's the one about, anyway, maybe it's the next one. Oh, it's Peter Pupkin. So yeah, the thing is, like, there's a town here with the same characters, and the stories are about kind of the same characters. They appear in different stories. So they're interconnected short stories about a small town in Canada. And like it even says at the beginning, like, you already know Mariposa, kind of. Or no, I don't know whether you know Mariposa. If not, it is of no consequence. For if you know Canada at all, you are probably well acquainted with a dozen towns just like it. So it's like all those little towns that you drive through if you're from the city. Or if you're from a small town, then you're probably from a town exactly like this town that's trying to describe. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed this collection. Okay, the next is Lives of Girls and Women by Alice Munro. So another Canadian book of short stories. These ones were all connected as well, like the previous one, but which is kind of different from Alice Munro's normal stuff, which are all non-connected stories. These all have the same main character, and they go in chronological order from when she's a girl to, I think, if I'm not wrong, a young adult. Yeah, some people even like classify this as a novel. Like, there's like a vague narrative arc, I guess. A lot of the stories focus on the relationship between her and her mom, I think. And yeah, I to be honest, I didn't find this quite as, yeah, I'm gonna have to put it a little lower than the other Alice Munro stories. Maybe like here. Yeah, maybe here. Like, it was still good. Let me see if there's anything I remember. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend it for someone like a first introduction to Alice Munro. I don't think it really captures what she does. Alice Munro is good at like stories that are individual, I think, rather than this like kind of pseudo novel. The next one is The Whitsun Weddings by Philip Larkin, and so this was lent to me by Jonah as well, who lent me the other poetry book, the Dances one, and I don't remember the poems in this like almost at all, which is a little embarrassing, but that probably means I'm gonna put it in like meh. Yeah, I straight up, I don't know how I read this whole poetry collection. It was not very long, to be fair. I think I read it probably in one sitting, like you normally can read a poetry collection, and I just don't remember much about it. Like, I think, if anything, I think there was like one poem about a guy who, it's like about the previous occupant of his apartment. But anyway, like it goes like here. No, it goes even lower. Actually, like, it's just gonna go here. I don't remember much about it. Okay. Yeah, but I don't regret reading it. And so far, we haven't hit regrets yet, so that's good. I don't even know why I put that tier yet. Maybe we'll get there. Next is The Street by Mordecai Richler. So I did like Mordecai Richler's, so that's this guy, his writing, but I didn't like his essays so much, so I thought I should read the collection of short stories. I think he only has one, so it's The Street, and I did really like it. They're mostly set around the Mile End in Montreal, and I was living in Mile End for a couple months, just in a sublet, and so it was really nice to like be outside reading this book. I think I read it in like Parc Outremont or something, or nearby, and the street is Saint Urbain Street. That's the reference, and the kind of like 5 streets surrounding it between Park and Saint Laurent is where Mordecai Richler grew up. So this is sort of capturing I think it's around the war, maybe pre-war and during the war times, growing up as a Jewish boy in that neighborhood. And yeah, I know, I think this goes in recommended. It's gonna go, I think, higher than, yeah, honestly, like it should go here, I think. It was good. Yeah. Next, so we're getting about to the halfway point of the stories. This is a really long video. Yeah, we're getting to June now. So when I actually read these books, I think the next is Where I'm Calling From, by Raymond Carver. This is, I think, like it has some stories from previous collections, so it's not like it wasn't new. Not all the stories were new at the time. But they're really good, and they tend to be shorter. So like a book like this actually has like something like 50 stories versus like 12. So yeah, they're really quite short stories. Quick to the point, very very like terse writing style kind of. And there are some really good stories in here. Let me say, like, I think this is just like it has a lot of stories, so not all of them are obviously gonna like speak to you, but some were really good. Let me try and remember which were really good. Okay, What We Talk About When We Talk About Love was good. So Much Water So Close to Home was good. Where I'm Calling From is amazing. Like it's one of my favorite short stories, just period, I think. Where I'm Calling From is really, really great. It's about someone who's in a house for recovering alcoholics. Yeah, just that's a story I've read multiple times, I think. I don't normally read stories like a million times, but that one I've read quite a few times. And there's one about a cake for a little boy. And I can't remember the title for it, but that was really, really good as well. I just can't remember the title. But it's in here, and if you read this book and you get to it, you'll know what I'm talking about. That's a really, really good story. This is really recommended. I think oh, by the way, like, I put all these books on Goodreads, and you can follow me if you find me on Goodreads. The like ranking here may not be the same as the stars, because the stars I put right after I read them. This is now that I am trying to remember them, so they may not correlate. I think I gave this 4 stars just because like you're not gonna like every single story on it. It's just there's too many stories. But in terms of like, can I pick 12 stories that were absolutely amazing on this book, in this book? And the answer is yes. So like I think that in retrospect, like it should go a lot higher. I think it may just like belong up here, or yeah, maybe there. I think it should belong there. And I think I'm gonna make a tiny little switch here. I think I put Alice Munro like lower, and she should just go higher. Like this was a good collection. Okay, so the next story is Alexandre Chenevert. I think it's this. Sorry for the thumbnails, which are a little fuzzy. I just stole them from Goodreads. And yeah, Alexandre Chenevert. This, I think, is the first regrets. And I'm going to talk about... So it's in French. I read it in French. And once again, maybe I'm just bad at French. But I just could not get into the story. And it's called The Cashier in English. And it's about this bank teller, a person who works in a bank. He's like pretty old, maybe like 50 or something, and he just like is done with life. And it just talks about how much he's done with life. And then there's a brief part where he like goes and has a little vacation. And even when he goes on vacation, he's still like done with life. I don't know. It was just like a lot of, I couldn't really like care about this character, and yeah, honestly, I kind of regretted picking it up. I just went to the library. I knew Gabrielle Roy is like a good, Canadian writer in French, and I was like, I want to read her stuff. And then I picked up this book kind of at random, and I just didn't like it. So yeah, it's gonna go in regrets. That's Alexandre Chenevert. So Alice in Wonderland. This is good. I have it here, and maybe I'll leaf through it. It's gonna go. I'm just gonna put it there for now. That's not where it's gonna go. I think it's good. Like, it's a kid's book, and as well, things like this is something I would have really enjoyed if I had read it when I was a kid. I just didn't come across it when I was a kid. If I'd read it when I was like maybe 10 or 12, I would have really, really liked it. And even now, I think it's like super clever and just a classic story. I've seen the movie. Yeah, it's gonna go in. For like an adult, there's no need to read it, I think. But it's still clever and good. So why not put it like top of okay? So I think this is actually the halfway point of the year. If I'm not wrong, that was June and this is July. So we're at the halfway point of the year. There's 30 books. And so in the second half of the year, I read more than, I read 42 books in the second half of the year. Okay. So next is The Love of a Good Woman by Alice Munro. Another collection of short stories. There's really a lot here. Okay, so let's look at the titles. Yeah, this is like maybe less memorable. Jakarta, let me think. I think Jakarta, Yeah, I don't really remember all of them. Oh, Save the Reaper, I think. If I like, sometimes I just don't remember the um, titles of this, but I think it's written from the point of view of like a grandma with kids, and then there's like this lady who enters into like who like kind of forcibly enters their life for a moment, and it was kind of like very tense and suspenseful for yeah, I don't know. It felt very tense, more so than Alice Munro stories normally are. And then what else? The Children's Day is sad. It's about a woman leaving her husband and kids, which I think did happen in Alice Munro's life. She left her husband um, at some point. Yeah, yeah. I mean, okay. So it's not like the most memorable. In fact, I think I might put it like around. Try to make this easier. Like it's around Lives of Girls and Women, maybe even a little worse to me. No, actually, like it's definitely. I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna put it around here. Let's just. I mean, I can't be too picky with exactly where things are. I'm just gonna agonize for too long. Okay, so Simple Recipes is next. This was good. I read the title story in high school. I definitely remember that. So title story at least was super memorable because I read it in high school and I still remember that I read it like 8 years ago or whatever. Yeah, that's a really good story. The stories are all super sad. First of all, like I don't know, it just doesn't stop. All of them are sad, and they're all like kind of. I think all of them are. Most of them are from a kind of immigrant perspective. I think Madeline Tien is from either Singapore or Malaysia, and grew up in Canada, or maybe he was born in Canada to. Yeah, okay, sorry, born in Vancouver, um, and if I'm not wrong, she is of Malaysian Chinese heritage. And yeah, so another book of immigrant stories. I liked it. Maybe yeah, it was really good. I think. Let me see. I gotta find it first. It's right here. Yeah, like a little bit less than maybe here, like above Sunshine Sketches, but it was really good. And maybe I'm just like a sucker for these like immigrant stories. I don't know. That's like the theme of this year of reading, at least for the summer. Okay. Um, Next is Funicular Volume 2, Issue 2. I don't know if this counts as a book. If we're only counting like books, this is an issue of a literary magazine. So I don't know. There's two of them in this list. I got them as a gift from my friend Rosie. I don't know. Obviously, like the quality is a little bit like not quite. You can tell like you know in literary magazines you get a lot of like up and coming authors, and as someone who I do write short stories and submit them to literary magazines, like I feel like I shouldn't criticize. These are authors like me trying to get their work out there, and they're like good. I read through all this and pretty quickly and enjoyed a lot of the stories. There's yeah, I don't remember the titles or what they correspond to. There's one like some like weird supernatural thing like is like entering their house or something like that. I remember that. I think this is this specific book. And there's a bunch of poetry. And yeah, it's gonna be I think yeah, I'll put it in like meh. It's around here. Maybe here. But like just like there were a couple standout stories. But ultimately most aren't like anything to write home about. At least compared to like the other books on this list. Next on the list is A Farewell to Arms, which I don't have with me because I lent it to my brother and he's reading it right now. But here it is right here, and this goes on top. Like I really like this book. I read it in Milan while I was traveling. I had some like nice idea of reading this book close to where the stuff happened. And yeah, it was like really good. I think it's kind of interesting. Like I put a lot of short story collections up on top, so you can kind of tell that I just really like short story collections. But this is probably my favorite novel that I read this year. yeah, it goes here, I think. Maybe here. Maybe here. Okay, I don't know. I'm not gonna like get too nitpicky, but it's about an ambulance driver in World War One who falls in love with this woman, Catherine Barclay, and sort of he like goes in and out of the front and continues to see this woman, and then things kind of get real with respect to the war. And yeah, it's quite an exciting ending and really sad ending. Okay, but it's a classic novel, and I think highly recommended. You should just read it. And Hemingway's writing style is like love or hate. A lot of people really do not like it, but I do. I for what it's worth, I do like his writing style, and it's just a good book. So next on the list is Favole al telefono by Gianni Rodari, and I read this in Italian. And I've been trying to learn Italian my whole life, and it's not very good, but it is good enough to read kids' stories. So these stories are probably aimed at kids like between 6 to 10 or something, and yeah, there's like lots of words that I don't know, and I have to like look them up. But generally, like vocabulary wise is what I'm missing. I understand the grammar well enough to read a book of kids' stories. And what I have to say about the stories themselves is that it's really like stories are quite weird, honestly. Like, let me like they're really short. Like they tend to be like one page, kind of. Let's see if I can. Like one page, that's one story, and then another story. So they're usually like between 1 and 3 pages. And I wish I could remember exactly what I'm talking about, but the stories are not quite like kids' stories in that I grew up with. Like, first of all, they're like written. Kids normally read fairy tales, and fairy tales are so old that they're always about kids in like a different time, like in village or in like there's a king and stuff like that. This is like, stories from some modern, like in a modern setting, a lot of them, and just weird things happen. And a nice thing is like they don't always have morals either. Like a lot of kids' stories are just like, they ram home like it's some kind of moral. This didn't feel like all these stories had morals. They were just like funny and like weird, and yeah, I think there's they've very recently put out an English translation of this, and yeah, I think if I ever have kids, I might try and get like the English translation, because it's just I felt like they could be cool stories for a kid to have on their shelf. Yeah, and it's gonna go for for an adult, it's got to go somewhere between okay and meh, right? Because they're not the most interesting stories, but yeah, maybe here, maybe here, honestly. But next is The Picture of Dorian Gray and Other Writings, and many of the other writings in here I had actually read before, but I decided to read again. Yeah, they're like plays. So The Picture of Dorian Gray I'd never read, and that was really good. If you don't know, Dorian Gray is this young man who is about to get a portrait done of him, and he's like a really like, he's a beautiful man, like radiant beauty, and they capture this beauty in this portrait, and as he becomes sort of more and more, like as his character becomes uglier and uglier, he stays pretty, but like his portrait starts to like decay. Classic story. And just really a good story to read, and very readable today, and it's pretty short. Like I'll show you, it's about the first part of the book is The Picture of Dorian Gray, so it's about 200 pages, like a short novel, and then the rest is like plays in this book. I had read most of them before, I think. I really like Salome, which is Salome is the daughter of King Herod, I think in real life and also in the Bible, and sort of the story of her and like John the Baptist and stuff is in here. That was really good. And The Importance of Being Earnest at the end. I studied that in high school. And yeah, I read it again, and it's just as funny, and like people getting engaged and stuff. It's, lighthearted. Okay, so this is good. I liked it. It's gonna go in recommend. And it's going to go pretty high in recommend, I think. Maybe up here. Yeah. Behind Narcissus and Goldmint. All right. Next is The Golden Apples by Eudora Welty. These are set in the American South. I think they're written in the 30s or 40s, like 20th century, 1947. And yeah, they're related in that they're all told in the same town they're all set in the same town, and they're about sort of these characters that recur, or at least are related to one another. The last names match and stuff. Yeah, June Recital, that's what I was thinking about. That reminded me a little bit of Dance of the Happy Shades, but not really, because the plots are completely different. And I wonder if Alice Munro was inspired by Eudora Welty. The writing is a lot like Alice Munro's, I guess, but there's more of a southern flavor to the writing, because a lot of it is written in like the sort of vernacular of the South. The stories themselves, like the plots, maybe not so memorable. Oh, Moon Lake, I think, is the one. There's like a boy. Yeah, okay, like that one was sad. Whole World Knows, Music from Spain. Yeah, not like super memorable plot lines. Now that I'm like looking through the stories, Shower of Gold. Yeah, but good. I think like this. It felt like in many ways that there's like something here of substance that I would get if I read it again. So this is definitely something I'm glad to have, and we'll definitely read some of these stories again. Golden Apples. Okay, so yeah, found it, and it's gonna go in okay, but towards the top. Like I said, I think I might need to reread some of these stories, but I do remember enjoying them as when I read them. So yeah, like above Wilderness Tips. Okay, and now that I'm looking through, I completely forgot this book, Tales of the Jazz Age. I read it in spring, and then I immediately lent it away, and that's why I don't have it and I forgot about it. It goes in... Yeah, it's by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Sorry, I'm sorry I can't show it to you. It's by F. Scott Fitzgerald. It's stories from like the early 1920s. A lot of them were written, I think, during that time, or they were at least about that. In there is Benjamin Button, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which is really kind of, I mean, it's a standout one. It's about a guy who ages backwards. He's born an old man and then ages to become a baby at the end of his life. And it's really, like, honestly quite sad. There was a movie about it with, I think there's Angelina Jolie in it. I don't know. Anyway, I didn't actually watch the movie. I've only read the short story, and there were other short stories too. Like there was one called like, I think it's called Oh Russet Witch or something. For some reason, I remember. So I think it's recommended. It'll go here. Maybe here. Yeah. Okay. Next is Funicular Volume 3. I don't remember too much that was different between Funicular Volume 3 and Volume 2, so I'm just going to put here. There's just 2 issues that I got. And once again, like, yeah, I'll just look just to make sure there wasn't anything that I completely forgot. But, yeah, they were all not super memorable from what I got out of it when I read it. Oh, next is Demian, which I don't have because I borrowed it from my friend Jad while we were traveling. And it goes, I read it in one sitting because we had missed a ferry, and so we're like, had now the whole day to spend in KL, Kuala Lumpur. And so we just sat in a cafe, and we're like, you know what, like, we're kind of forced to have a chill day anyway because we missed our ferry for like whatever we were going to do, the excursion we were going to do that day. So we just sat in a cafe and read, and he read his book, and I read Crime and Punishment, and I read one of his books that he'd brought that he'd already finished, Demian. And yeah, I just read it in one sitting. We sat in that place for like 3-4 hours, and it was really good. I think I liked it more than Narcissus and Goldmint, and to be honest, maybe even more than the Vonnegut books. Yeah, it's pretty high on there. It has a lot in common with Narcissus and Goldmund. It's set in Germany as well. I think Narcissus and Goldmund is medieval Germany, whereas Demian is. Oh, now I can't remember the setting, what time period it is. But it's like villagey kind of Germany as well. And it's about this guy. I don't remember the main character's name, but he meets a guy named Demian, who is an older boy, I think, and the older boy kind of has like interesting takes on life, kind of that like for example, he's like kind of pro-violence and stuff like that, and there's a lot in there about guilt that I remember, and yeah, just kind of a guy reconciling with the dark emotions within himself and stuff like that, and he has kind of a friend who's a bit of the devil on his shoulder when it comes to that. Yeah, it's a coming of age thing, just like most of Hermann Hesse's novels, a coming of age story that I thought was done very well. Okay, next, I have it in my hand, is The Heart of a Dog by Bulgakov, Mikhail Bulgakov. And I was a bit disappointed with this book. I think Bulgakov, if I'm not wrong, wrote The Master and Margarita, which I heard was really good. And then I was like, I couldn't find it, but I did see this book in a bookstore. And I was like, you know what? Like, let's just try and read it. It's about a Moscow professor befriends a stray dog and tries to put the testicles and the pituitary gland of this of a man into this dog, and then the dog starts becoming odd. Like, it has the brain of it has the pituitary gland of a man and the testicles, and so it starts exhibiting funny behavior, and it's a commentary on I think Bolshevism. Like, it was written in the early days of Soviet communism. Yeah, it's a commentary. I think it's one of those books that's like it's enjoyable. Like, I think it's one of those books that's maybe like important in a way, like historically as well, and it is like no doubt entertaining, like what happens, but I did think it was a little bit meh, and honestly, like, kind of silly. I don't know if that's not the yeah. You know what? Like, okay, it's okay. No, it's meh. I'm gonna put it here, or maybe here. Okay, it's an okay. Next is Mrs. Dalloway, which is really, really good. Mrs. Dalloway is I've never read a book like it. It's written in the modern style, or modernist style, sorry, which, is kind of old by this point. It's like 100 years old, but that's modernist for you. And it's like very stream of consciousness. It all happens in one day. Like, Mrs. Dalloway is about to host a party, and there are people from her past that are going to be there. And meanwhile, there's also this guy Septimus. I don't know what's his last name, and his fiance or wife or something, who's dealing with repercussions like PTSD from World War I, which had just happened. And it's like super stream of consciousness. Like, it's dealing with all these little minute details of this one day in this person's life, but at the same time, yeah, it does go back in her life and stuff. And I'll just have to read it again to fully understand it, I think. But I wasn't expecting to like reading it. Like, I knew it was gonna be like a sort of like, I knew it was like some kind of jewel of modern literature. And I knew, like, kind of you're supposed to read it and appreciate it, but I didn't expect that I would just actually like enjoy reading the sentence level of this book so much. And even if I didn't understand all the deeper meanings, like, I'll have to reread it to really understand like the link between Septimus, this guy, and Dalloway, Mrs. Dalloway. Like, yeah, even if you don't get all that, it's just like, I thought it was enjoyable to read, which I wasn't expecting to. So yeah, I recommend it, and I recommend it to myself too for a reread. I always say I'm going to reread things and then I don't, but I will eventually do this one day. And I have more Virginia Woolf books to read too before I reread this one, probably. Where is this book? Oh my god. Oh, it's right there. Okay. Recommended. It's high on recommended, I think. There. Okay, next is this anthology, and this is when I finished it, but I started it like a lot earlier in the year, and I think this is a really good anthology to like get into short stories. As you can tell, I really love short stories. Half of the books here are short story collections, and yeah, this was like, I think it's a textbook for some introductory class on short stories or something, but it doesn't matter because it's mostly just short stories. So you can just read the stories and you don't have to like, the back of it has like, which I did also read out of some kind of like sense of duty to finish the whole book. There's like, things about short stories, how to read one, how to write one, how to study and analyze them. But that's not the point. I think the point are, there's just a bunch of short stories and like tiny, tiny little commentaries on them. Yeah, so this is honestly where I got a lot of like how I even found the authors, how I even like knew to like, for example, like pick up a Eudora Welty book at the bookstore is because I saw Eudora Welty in here. Yeah, A Worn Path is in this book. Alice Munro's in here. One of the stories from Dance with the Happy Shades is on here. And yeah, it's just sort of like a celebration and a study of the short story form. So I really, really highly recommend this. It's a massive book. It's I think it's like 900 pages or something, but it's like honestly good bang for like weight. I brought it backpacking just because like it has 900 pages, but it's printed on this like Bible thin paper, so you get a lot of pages for how much it weighs. Yeah, I think I'm gonna highly recommend it. I don't think I need to explain why an anthology of the best short stories is gonna be highly recommended, but it's gonna go and recommend it if I can only find the stupid cover. Oh my god, I put it here. Okay. Yeah, recommended. Recommended quite high, I think. Yeah. Like, yeah, this is a big part of my year. It was just, reading these stories in between all the other stories was like, I did that for like 3 months. So I think it goes pretty high. In fact, put it even higher. Okay. Okay, next is Piranesi. And this is a book that I bought and then read the whole thing in one day. And like a lot of the other books that I do that too, I put really, really high. This one is one that like as I've thought about it, maybe it's gotten a little down. I think like when I first read it, I was like, oh my god, what a concept! And like it is an interesting concept. It's about Piranesi who lives in a house, and there's like one other person in this house, and he's just explores the house, and obviously a lot more gets revealed. Yeah, and he doesn't know how he got in the house. He just knows he's always lived here, or he feels like he's always lived here, and then it uncovers the plot from there. So it's a really interesting concept and really easy to read. I got it at the airport and then just had a bunch of plane rides, and I just read them during the plane rides. So, yeah, like really easy to read. I do recommend it. Not as like, just like in the moment I thought it was really good. Now that I've thought about it so more, it's not like that good. The ending maybe was a little disappointing, I thought, but yeah, definitely recommended. So it goes maybe here. Sure, yeah, maybe. Next is Turgenev. Fathers and Sons by Ivan Turgenev. Maybe it was a translation or something. Like, I actually regret reading this book. I found it quite hard to get through it. I don't know. I guess I'm not so acquainted with Russian literature. I want to get more into it. I just felt like sometimes, like, it was so cumbersome. Like, it was like it would belabor points, and all old books do this. Like they'll belabor the same point. Like they'll write in like 10 sentences what could be said in one. It's just like the way it was, like how good literature or what literature was sorry, what was considered good writing back then. Um, and yeah, I don't know. So what was considered good writing back then just may not be to my taste. And yeah, I just didn't really like it. I thought it was boring, kind of. It's about a guy who's young. He goes home for the holidays. He brings his student friend, and then there is like a big clash of values in between the generations. Okay, so I think it goes in regrets. It's weird that like maybe I find these are even better than the Wits and Weddings, which I don't regret reading. So like that's why like it doesn't go in regrets. It's just I don't remember much about it, and I don't have it in front of me to like recall what the poems were. So that's the nuance between these two. Tears. Okay, so next is Beowulf. And I really like reading Beowulf. It's it's kind of like it's kind of it's like a fighting. It's about a guy who fights a guy Beowulf who fights a monster named Grendel, and then later Grendel's mom. I think yes, some monster. And I have this is the bilingual edition, so there's English on this side, and then there's modern English on this side. So this is old English. So I don't know if it's bilingual so much as just two forms of the same language, but you can't read old English anymore. Like I'll read you. Hang on, I'll read you the first few lines of the old English. So it's yeah. What we gardena in yeardagum theod kuninga thrum jofrunon huda edelingas ellen fremedon. And you got none of that. And yeah, so on the right it has the translation. And yeah, just like a really fun, I like kind of fun story about this guy who goes for glory and fights this monster, and like there's a lot of in there about like old English values like honor and like loyalty and kind of being a manly man. Like I'm not saying that like these are things you should live by. It's just interesting, and honestly it was like I saw after I read it, I saw a review on Goodreads that said this is like the action movie, like Rambo or something, like those those action movies that are just like they like really celebrate like machismo and they're very fast paced, and it's just like about this is like the 10th century version of that or 8th century version of that whenever this was written. And yeah, just fun to read and interesting if you're like kind of a language nerd like me or a history nerd. Definitely interesting. So I think recommended. Yeah, I'm gonna put it above the poetry. On in recommended. Up next is My Financial Career and Other Follies by Stephen Leacock. So I really like Sunshine Sketches, and I was like, you know what, let's read more Stephen Leacock. This one was not quite as good of a collection. It also wasn't an original collection. Like it's one of those that like after he died, it's like a best of or like stories that fit a certain theme. So some of these were in Sunshine Sketches. So I'm gonna put it well into okay. Let's say yeah, around what was this again? This was Heart of Darkness. So around Heart of Darkness, let's say. And yeah, like my favorite story in here is the one that was in here. So I think I should count that as being in Sunshine Sketches and not in this because this is like a recollection. Yeah, okay, there's funny stuff. Like maybe I gotta like now that my Revelations of the Spy, it was pretty funny. Um, but like they're all still funny. I don't know how I can really hate it when it's meant to be funny and it is like funny. It's not meant to be too serious. So maybe it goes a little higher. But it's around here. Then I read To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. And this is, classic. A lot of people read it in high school. I did not. I just read it now. But it definitely doesn't go in okay. It definitely goes in recommended. Yeah, above this, above that. Pretty high in recommended, I think. Above. It's around Mrs. Dalloway, I think. Maybe better. No, it's less. Less than Mrs. Dalloway. Sorry, less. So behind Mrs. Dalloway. Yeah, it's about a guy. It's told from the perspective of a young girl whose father is a lawyer, and is defending a black man who's accused of the rape of a white girl. And so it explores race relations in the South. I think in the I think in the 20th century. Anyway, it's just really good and a classic. Okay, next is Wuthering Heights. This is the only book on the list that I've read kind of as an there's a couple of them I read as an audiobook, kind of just like part read as an audiobook and then part read as a book, because I have the book, but sometimes it's nice to listen to an audiobook while doing something else that's monotonous. And so since it's in the public domain, I thought, why not? So yeah, I would like read some chapters of this in the audiobook, but then when I can sit down and look at the book, I'll just continue where I left off. So yeah, this one specifically I read on a drive. Like I listened to the audiobook on a drive, and I really liked it actually. Yes, the writing, like I'm not the hugest fan of like Victorian era. Is this even Victorian? It might be even earlier. Let me just check. The Brontes, 1840s? Oh yeah, 1840s is Victorian, right? So Victorian, like yeah, it's like convoluted. Like I said, like kind of like with the Russian literature, sometimes they spend a long time saying something that didn't need so much talking, but like just this whole tragedy of the situation, like the romance, I did get like caught up in it. It like kind of felt like a K-drama, which sounds like, it's just a criticism maybe. Like I make fun of my mom for her K-dramas, for watching her K-dramas that are so cheesy. And this is like ultimately like a little bit cheesy by modern standards, but like I do recommend it. Like I think it's a good book. Like so, some of the dialogue specifically is like just cheesy, like the professions of love and just like the sheer amount of like despair, like their expressions of despair and like I don't know. Like I want to like, I know I'm saying a lot of negative things about it, but at the same time I did enjoy the book. So I'm gonna put it in recommend and put it like around Dorian Gray. Maybe less than Dorian Gray. Okay. Next was Our Spoons Came from Woolworths, which I had not heard anything about. I went to the bookstore, and this doesn't normally happen, where I go to a bookstore and pick up a book I'd never even ever heard of. But I just looked at the back and thought it was interesting. It's about an artist, a girl she's 21, an artist, a student, and marries a fellow artist, and then they kind of create a little existence for themselves. They have a little apartment, they have a kid, and then things kind of go south from there. It's like very slice of life. It's written from the point of view of this woman as she's a little bit older. Maybe she's like 40 or something. Like she's definitely older. She's talking about this that happened in her life earlier. It's very autobiographical, if I'm not wrong. It even says okay, well, no. So what it says here, like, the only things that are true in this story are the wedding and chapters 10, 11, and 12. And 10, 11, and 12 are her giving birth. Oh, and the poverty. So it is autobiographical, kind of. Like, the plot points aren't, but, like, the feeling is. Like, it's autobiographical in, like, form, I guess. And yeah, and some of it is straight up autobiographical. So there we go. And yeah, I really, really liked it. Like I didn't know what to expect going into it. I liked it. It was like slice of life, very cute. Like the protagonist is just so incompetent, like insanely incompetent. And she's talking now from like later on in life when she knows her own incompetency, but so she's like very self-deprecating, and it's just a funny tone, and it's also just so tragic. Like she should not be in charge of kids, right? Like, and the whole thing just unfolds. It's like it's just a train wreck and really entertaining and yeah, weird. And where is the book? Let me find it. Right here. Oh, is this in order now? Maybe it's in order now. Yeah, it's recommended. It's quite highly recommended, I would say. More than Wuthering Heights, more than Piranesi, more than around the Vonnegut books. Let's put it right after Demian. Yeah. Next is the Meditations. This is specific. It's actually called like the version I have has other things in it, but the main attraction is the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and I liked it. Like it's a bit of a, it's kind of self-help, right? Or like, no, okay, it's like Stoic philosophy, but it's that Stoic philosophy, or like was kind of the self-help book of its day. I think it has an interesting concept where Marcus Aurelius did not mean for these meditations to be read by another person. They were just for himself, which means it's kind of like literally self-help. Like, I'm writing this to tell myself something. And so like the advice he gives is like from the point of view of an emperor of an empire, of like the Roman Empire. And like that's not going to be like exactly applicable to you, but in a way kind of like it's not. I think the true good advice is like kind of true through analogy. Like no one can really tell you what's best in your life, but they can tell you like what they did in their own life or what they strive for in their own life, and you're supposed to, by analogy, make decisions for yourself, right? And I think that's why like literature is such good self-help. Like I don't really read self-help books. I didn't read any this year. I'm not sure if like I'm qualified to say that they just all suck. I just don't like them. And I feel like literature can be very good self-help because you read a story, and even if it's made up, you like see something happen, and then you can agree with it or disagree with it, but in many ways it can teach you something about how to live. And this is kind of like that. This is like, it feels less preachy because it's like actually a guy's diary. Like, what do I need to do in my own life as an emperor? And then you read it and you're like, okay, like there's some philosophy behind this that I could apply in my own life. So that's what I thought of Meditations. It's, yeah, I like something I will definitely reread and I was also actually kind of inspired to like do this for myself, but I didn't. So that's how like just write down my own meditations. I was inspired to, and then I didn't do it, like with all things. So this is recommended. It's not like it's a little bit dry, but honestly good. So higher than Beowulf, sure. Around here. Around Beowulf. Okay, we're getting to the tail end, like last third. This is chronologically we're in like September now. Here the Dark. So Here the Dark is next, by David Bergen. I just picked this up on a whim, in like a gas station, I think, or something. I was surprised the gas station was like selling literature books, but they specifically were like, there's a shelf that was like Canadian literature. And I saw this book, so I was like, okay. Yeah, I was on a road trip. I was driving to Kelowna. Yeah, I don't know what I think of these stories. Like, I thought they were more or less well written. Yeah, like the plots were pretty memorable. I thought like there was a little bit of like machismo in here that I don't know why. Like, I feel like it's okay when Hemingway does it 100 years ago, but now when you do it in 20 something, it's like a little less, like, I feel like it's a little, I don't know, I like it a little less. Like, there's a lot about like being a man in here, I think. Just like fighting. There's also like this guy, like the absolute horn of this man. Like, every single story has some kind of sex scene, and a lot of them are quite similar actually, because presumably these appeared in different publications far apart from each other, but when you read all of them back to back, like, it's all about like some guy being like having some kind of like guilty sex. So I wonder what's going through David Bergen's mind, but anyway, I think they were like good. They were well written. Yeah, quite memorable actually. So like they're quite good. I maybe I didn't like enjoy all the exact like subject matter of the stories so much, but they were well written, and I'm gonna put it in okay. Maybe like around here. This is Heart of Darkness, right? Like better than Heart of Darkness. Okay. Then in the same vein, Men Without Women. So this is Hemingway. I like this more. It's like older, and honestly, like, I don't know. I'm just maybe I'm a Hemingway apologist. But yeah, a collection of short stories. There's some good ones in here. There's some Nick Adams ones in here. So I reread the stories, but Hills Like White Elephants is good. It's not a Nick Adams story. I read it previously in this anthology. Che ti dice la patria is like in Italy, like about a trip in Italy. Um, an Alpine Idyll. I think it's a Nick Adams story. I'm not sure if it is actually, but it has like a kind of crazy ending. Yeah, okay, so good stories. I feel like it's weird to put the Nick Adams stories high and then this one a little lower because a lot of them are actually the same stories, but um, oh well. I think, yeah, it's right here. Sorry, it is in order now. Yeah, maybe below the street. Okay. Then uh, I read The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, who is Lebanese author. This is not what. So I misunderstood, or like I remember there was a recommendation to read a book by Khalil Gibran, um, and so when I went to the bookstore, I just picked this one up because I was like, oh, this is the author that I saw on YouTube somewhere, or someone recommend on YouTube somewhere, and this was not the one that I think the one that was recommended was a story about like it was like a romance story I think between two people in like present day sort of. This is not. This is like in a sort of like fantasy village, and um, there's like a prophet who's about to leave the town, and he's as he leaves, the villagers ask him what he thinks about certain things, and he just says. So it's like not really like there's a frame story, but really it's not fiction. Like this is close kind of to self help. It's almost like meditations. Um, but it's good. Like I also I don't want to sound negative. This is not what I was expecting just because I didn't. I was expecting like a novel, and it's not a novel, but it's definitely good, and I'm gonna recommend it. It's gonna go quite high, I would say. I would recommend it like on the level of like honestly like around Piranesi, even more than Piranesi. I think like the like oh like the writing is just good. So here's a little excerpt. Then a woman said, "Speak to us of joy and sorrow." And he answered, he meaning the prophet, "Your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and the self same well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. It is not the cup that holds your wine, the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven." That's pretty deep stuff, honestly. I don't know. It was really good. Okay, then some library books. So The Invention of Yesterday, I read. So they're in order now. I don't have to keep checking my list. This one is like a history of the world from kind of a less Eurocentric perspective and more of like a Central Asian perspective almost. Like, uh, yeah, like there's a lot about the Silk Road. It's not the Silk Roads, which I also want to read, which I think is more explicitly a Central Asian perspective. This is written by a Central Asian author, I think. Um, and so there's a lot of like perspectives of like the idea I think is that like um, the entire concept of history is something that's like made up. Um, it's like the stories that we tell about ourselves, um, and really like links between things. Like for example, like um, what's one of them? Like there's something to do with the Opium War, I think, or something to do. It was something to do in China. Oh, the collapse of the Ming. Maybe the collapse of the Ming dynasty is like related to the some like recession in Spain. You know, stuff like that. Like it's always like something in the world is related to something else, and the world has always been very interconnected. And that was one of the points that Tamim Ansari was. I did find that while the points were kind of fascinating, sometimes the backup, like the the reasoning wasn't fully fleshed out, so I was still a little skeptical. And all the sources are there, so I guess you could like to really understand how the Spanish recession caused the collapse of the Ming. You would have to dig into the sources. In the book, it's just like a paragraph, and you're kind of just like, okay, you haven't really convinced me, but I'll believe you. So yeah, it's okay. It's a history book. I liked it. Um, it was a little more readable than this Singapore history book, but ultimately still a history book. So I'm gonna put it in like Oof. I'll put it here, just after Heart of Darkness. Okay, so the next is Beautiful World, Where Are You?, which I got at the same time from the library. And this was good. This is a bit more like light-hearted, like easy reading. I think like kind of felt like reading a John Green book, like really easy to read. It's about young adults and their love lives, and not just their love lives, but their work lives, and trying to like adult for not the first time because they're like maybe 30, but they're still struggling, to find their place in this world. And yeah, not much more to say about that except that yeah, you just kind of want them to be happy, and then it's not a tragedy. They are more or less happy, and then it's just kind of good vibes. I will put it quite high, maybe here, like around like Piranesi, so less than Piranesi. Maybe around Wuthering Heights. Okay, pretty good. Okay, then Far from the Madding Crowd is what I read next. This one I actually have. It's right here by Thomas Hardy. And I read Thomas Hardy before. Thomas Hardy, I think, is like one of my dad's favorite authors because he recommended Jude the Obscure to me when I was in like grade 8, and I read it and was completely like traumatized by that book. It's so sad. And I was kind of expecting that from this book, but no, this is a much more lighthearted book. It's a romance kind of about Bathsheba Everdeen, this kind of like a not like the other girls sort of character type, but in a Victorian setting. And she has like, there are 3 men in her life who are all kind of vying for her affection. And yeah, it's like funny things happen, and ultimately it's a very cute story. And then I watched the movie after with some friends, and I just really liked it. So it's recommended quite highly. Let's say around, like quite highly, honestly. It's one of my favorite books that I read this year. And once again, it's kind of old. Like the Victorian writing is, cumbersome in the way that Victorian writing is always going to be, but Thomas Hardy is like it's bearable. I'll just say. Okay. It helps that the chapters are really short. So it's one of those like Victorian novels that was originally presented like piecemeal in like I don't know what it's called, like it's a serialized publication. So the chapters are really short. People used to read this like week after week and still follow the story that way. And that makes it easier to read, like, when it could be dense, like instead of, you know what I'm trying to say. Okay, so then I read The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway, which is about Americans living in Paris in the 1920s. And I didn't quite like this much. I didn't like this quite as much as Feral to Arms, but it's still good. I think I have to place it in recommended. Just like around above Narcissus and Goldmund. Above Kurt Vonnegut. Yeah, above Kurt Vonnegut. Maybe here. Maybe here. Okay. Yeah. I did like Our Spoons Came from Woolworths a little more. What can I say about this? It's about expats living in Paris, and they go to see the bull run in Pamplona, and there's all sorts of like dysfunction within their friend group, and it's quite gossipy actually, because this is very much based on a real trip Ernest Hemingway took with his friends, American friends, in the 1920s, and so kind of gossipy, but ultimately entertaining, and the writing is good. I like the writing. Okay, then I read this book, We Were Dreamers by Simu Liu, and my books are falling over. So We Were Dreamers. This is a book that my sister bought for my mom, and then after she read it, I just read it, so it belongs to her. And I love Kim's Convenience. I always watch the new season when it comes out. because well, it's over now, but I used to watch it, and just to kind of like, because we'll just talk about it. Like it started becoming a bit more like vapid storylines, but it's just, once again, like immigrant stories that are a little bit relatable for me and my siblings. And anyway, you have that kind of, the Kim's Convenience is like kind of sugar coated a little bit. They're happy and stuff, but Simu, his story is a little. It's like, I wouldn't say it's like tragic. It's definitely not tragic, but it's a little bit darker than that kind of story in Kim's Convenience, like happy immigrant family. Like, he really does delve into like what is straight up. I mean, you can term it straight up abuse, like how his parents treated him, and like they're like how they got him to be like to excel academically, or how much they wanted him to excel academically, and then in his career, and then how he gave all that up to pursue acting and stuff, and his relationship with his family, or like how that affected his relationship with his family. And it was just good. I think, recommended. It's a memoir, so not like all the fiction books, but maybe it should be in its own category, but I'll just put it somewhere in recommended. Yeah, like around the middle of recommended. It's kind of weird to compare it to other to fiction books that are nothing like it. Okay, then start putting books here. Next is The Lamp at Noon by Sinclair Ross. Well, it's The Lamp at Noon and Other Stories. So I had read The Lamp at Noon and The Painted Door in high school before, and I really like those stories, especially The Painted Door. And I think these are, unfortunately, like, I got this book kind of to be like, I like those stories back in high school, and I would like to have more like that. And yes, you do get more like that, but those two are the standout stories, like, no doubt. Yeah. Summer Thunder, September Snow is like a 2 parts story that was also pretty good. A little bit sad. Yeah, I think it's good. I think, again, a lot of recommend. I tend to read books that I like. I'm not that. Yeah, no, actually quite high. Let's say above Hemingway. Behind the Street. Yeah, there we go. Okay, then I read L'Étranger by Camus, and I think in English it means The Stranger, so I don't know if. But The Outsider, is that another translation of it? I'm not really sure. I've never seen this book in English. Yeah, this is honestly, it's maybe best read if you don't know anything about it. It's about this like super. Okay, it starts with, well, I'll read it in French. It says, the first few lines are Aujourd'hui, maman est morte, ou peut-être hier, je sais pas. J'ai reçu un télégramme de l'asile, mère décédée, enterrement demain, sentiment distingué. So like basically his mom just died. So it's like the first line is, today mom is dead. Or maybe it was yesterday, I don't know. Like it kind of like, he's so nonchalant about his mom's death. And that kind of tells you like, it immediately tells you like what kind of character we're talking about. Like a little bit weird. And then he does weird things, and he has weird interactions with other like kind of unsavory characters. And I don't know. I enjoyed it. It's yeah. Where should I put it? Oh my god. Is it not here? Oh, it's here. Okay, I think, yeah, it's recommended. Or maybe it's a top of okay. No, it's recommended. I'd say, yeah, bottom of recommended or top of okay. So I would put it maybe like after the Meditations of a Beowulf. Then I read Something I've Been Meaning to Tell You by Alice Munro. So another book of short stories. Let me just look. As always, I'm gonna look in here and like forget and be like, oh, I can't believe I forgot all the stories. Okay, this was more recent, so I do remember a lot of them. So Something I've Been Meaning to Tell You is interesting. The Found Boat is like kind of cute. It's like kids finding a boat, and then like the interactions between boys and girls, kids, well, of a certain time, because I think this is set in like the 50s or something. Um, Executioners. Honestly, like I don't. Ooh, the Ottawa Valley. It's amazing how fast I like forget all the plot lines, but I did enjoy reading the book. Like, so I'm going to put it vaguely. I mean, let's look at the other Munro books I've had. So yeah, like it's in recommended. I think I'll recommend almost any Munro book just because like the writing is good. But yeah, maybe somewhere around here, top of okay. Yeah, how about there? Okay. Then I read Dubliners. And another collection of short stories, like a classic one by James Joyce. Yeah, these were good stories. They're all written. They're set in Dublin in the beginning of the 20th century. They're about kind of the everyday people of Dublin. And yeah, I don't know what to say about. Okay, so let's look. Araby is a good story about a guy who falls in love with the sister of a friend, and yeah, after the what's the boarding house? The boarding house was interesting. It's about this lady who owns a boarding house, and one of the men there falls in love with her daughter or something, and she kind of like uses the situation to like her advantage, I think. And then what's another memorable one? Ooh, A Painful Case. Like I feel like a lot of these stories like wouldn't work today. Like they just don't write stories like that anymore. But for what they're worth, they're still good stories. Yeah, Mother, and then The Dead. Like The Dead is kind of it's I felt that like it was longer. I'm not sure if it's literally longer, but yeah, it's a longer story, more drawn out, and just kind of about a couple, or like a man and his wife, and the man kind of learning something about his wife that he didn't know, like from her past, and like I guess kind of getting hurt from it. Yeah. Okay. So they're good. I think very much, very much recommended. I think I've recommended a lot of stories, books now, but what can I say? They're just good. I think I'm gonna put this quite high, less than Ross, above Hemingway. Okay. Then oh, this is not in order because Burning Questions I forgot about. So Burning Questions and Shape I took out of the library. Burning Questions is a book of essays by Margaret Atwood that I thought was okay. And once again, it's like the essays thing where you're just not going to be interested in everything someone has to say about everything, but you may be interested in what someone has to say about certain things. And so it's still a good book to, leaf through, but maybe not to read every single essay. And yeah, so I'm just gonna have to put that around. Let's say around here. I don't know. Yeah, around there. Sure. And yeah, the thing is, a lot of them are like book reviews. So I find that a book review just isn't really interesting unless you've read the book. And if you haven't read the book and you will never read it, then it's not interesting. And if you haven't read the book and you want to read it in future, well, then the problem is that it spoils the book. So I don't know. But I am glad because I did pick up a book because I saw it in this book of essays, and it turned out to be a really good book. So, well, that's going to come later. Shape by Jordan Ellenberg. So Jordan Ellenberg is a really eminent mathematician modern mathematician. He solved the like capset problem at some point, and I I thought that paper was cool as much as insofar as I understood it. And so I was like, oh, he writes a lot of sort of pop math as well. And so I was like, yeah, I'll read it. And I may just not be the like, yeah, it's a nonfiction book. It talks a lot about, mathematical phenomena in how math explains like some social phenomena and stuff even. Yeah, actually mostly social phenomena. That's what it like focuses on, like gerrymandering and like the math behind like COVID statistics and stuff like that. It just wasn't like super, super interesting. I think the math is at like, I feel like I just wasn't the target demographic. Um, the target demographic is for people who haven't studied quite as much math. Because a lot of this stuff is stuff that math people were just talking about. Like, for example, the COVID stuff, like a lot of math people, because I was in university during COVID, um, and talking to math people, like, I think I've heard far too much discussion about the mathematics behind the like COVID statistics that I didn't really want to read a whole nother chapter of it. But so I'm just gonna put it in okay, with the caveat that I don't think I'm the right audience, but that Jordan Ellenberg is a good expositor of math. Um, okay, like where should I put this? I think honestly, like even less than, yeah, maybe like around here, or yeah, honestly maybe even there. Um, yeah, who would I recommend it to? Actually, like I think I would recommend it to people who are like in science. Like it's like, educated people. People are interested, like fairly educated and interested in the mathematical, um, like the mathematical mechanics behind stuff. But yeah, just wasn't super, super interesting for me. Anyway, so then next yeah, those were out of order, but I think I'm going back into order with oh my god, no. So the order is a little bit wrong. It doesn't matter. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is a book that I borrowed from my friend Bronwyn, so I don't have it with me. It's a memoir by Maya Angelou, and it specifically is from when she was born up to when she's a young adult, I think. It was good. I think, yeah, her writing is like very kind of conversational, candid. The her childhood had a lot of hardship and trauma. Honestly, like there's, I don't know, like the things that happened are pretty, um, like it's just hard to read, especially when you know that it's true. Like I can, yeah. So it's hard to read, but it doesn't mean, yeah, obviously it's not a bad book. So I think I'm gonna put it. Yeah, I think I'll put it around here. Maybe, yeah, around Dubliners. Maybe even above Dubliners. Okay. And yeah, she's definitely a person who kind of gets through the trauma of certain things, like I guess the trauma of growing up in poverty or certain other things I don't want to like spoil, I guess, but through like certain through some kind of humor. Like there's a lot of humor in the writing. It's not like on a Vonnegut style of like absurd, just completely absurd, off the wall humor. Like this is, just there's humor in the writing, which makes it still kind of like it's almost like it makes it bearable kind of to read things that otherwise would just be so difficult to read. It's because like, it's almost like she has made peace with it. And so you should find something beautiful in the story as a whole as well, even if certain parts of it are very hard to digest. Okay, then I also read Little Women, um, which I borrowed from my friend Lily, which is why I don't have the book. And I thought it was okay. It's a good book. It's also like just, such a classic that many people have read it when they're kids. I just wasn't the target demographic. I didn't even realize it was for like preteen girls. I think it's like aimed at like preteen girls. I thought it was like, okay, I mean, I knew it's obviously aimed at a female audience, but I thought it was like on the line of like Emma, where it's really not. Like Emma is for adults and Little Women is for kids. And I felt it was a little bit preachy at times. Like there's like the chapters are almost like episodic. Like they do go chronologically, but each chapter is kind of a little episode in their life. And like they kind of have like a clear moral in a way that often felt preachy. So I'm gonna have to put it in okay. Um, maybe behind Nanjing 1937. Okay. Yeah. Maybe even behind Alice Munro. Okay. Then next is Ethan Frome, which is a novella or a short novel by Edith Wharton. And it's about a farmer who falls in love with his wife's cousin. And his wife's cousin, like, who is living with them. and kind of helping them as a bit of a servant. Yeah, he falls in love with her. And it is... Oh, it's like sad. It's like... It's well written. It's kind of like a more modernly told Wuthering Heights. So like, I think I'm gonna have to put it better, like higher than Wuthering Heights for sure. And just because Wuthering Heights has like that Victorian dialogue that it's just, I find kind of hard to read. So I have to put this higher. But where exactly, I don't know. Maybe around here. No, actually maybe higher than The Sun Also Rises. Like, yeah, like, I think higher than The Sun Also Rises. Okay. And it's a really short read. So, yeah, then we're getting to the last few books. So we're well into December now. These are books I read in the last few weeks. Bluebeard's Egg by Margaret Atwood. It's a collection of short stories as well. Focusing, this one felt more autobiographical than, and I know this for a fact because I read the essays that she wrote, many of them detailing aspects of her life, like that she would spend winters in Toronto, but summers in like the forests of northern Ontario and Quebec, stuff like that. So these are things that I know to be true about Margaret Atwood's life. And this collection, more so than Wilderness Tips and I think, well, Dancing Girls I read a long time ago, and I'm not even sure I remember most of them, but this one really felt like I could really see the like autobiographical aspect to this collection of stories specifically. And I really liked it. Like, this is my favorite collection of short stories by Margaret Atwood that I've read so far. And yeah, there's a lot of like emphasis on, you know, childhood and nature, and sometimes like both of those together. And yeah, so like I think I like a more mature collection of stories than the previous one that I said. And I liked it, so I'm gonna put it in recommended. Yeah, in recommended, high and recommended, or like, okay, mid, because these are all pretty good. Higher than Wuthering Heights. No, actually like pretty high. Let's say, do I like it more than The Sun Also Rises as well? Honestly, like, when I like compare them individually like this, it kind of just goes further and further up. Maybe like on the level of like Far From the Madding Crowd. So something somewhere up there. A really good collection of short stories. Okay, then The Journey to the East by Hermann Hesse, which is not at all like what I thought it would be. It's not about a journey to the East. Like, I thought it'd be like a coming of age novel, like a lot of other Hermann Hesse novels. And, you know, Hermann Hesse is like really inspired by Eastern philosophies, like, you know, Indian and mostly Indian, I think. Maybe Chinese, I'm not sure. And I do know, like, from his biography that he went to Asia and stuff. This is nothing at all, not at all like that. This is like kind of almost like about some kind of cult. Like, it has a lot in common maybe with like 1984, just like less violent and less like tragic, but still weird. I don't know. I don't really know what to think about it. It was definitely not that good. It was an okay, I think. Straight up, it belongs around here, like around Heart of Darkness. Maybe better than Heart of Dark. Yeah, around there. Maybe better than Hear the Dark. I don't know. It's around there. Okay. Last few. So we have Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut. Yeah, I don't know what to say. Once again, plot insane, weird. There's an apocalypse in here. It's, you know, there aren't aliens. No, it's not aliens. This is like about science specifically, I think. It's like maybe, I don't know if it's a critique of science, but it's an exploration of, you know, ethics and science. And yeah, I don't want to say much more about it. I think what I've said about the other Vonnegut books is just as valid. It's also good, also very easy to read. I liked it, in fact. Like, I feel like I need to put them all together because they feel like the same. I feel like I don't want to rank them above each other. If anything, maybe I liked Cat's Cradle more than these two. Oh, but now, no, I'm gonna put them all at the same place, to be very diplomatic about my Vonnegut books. Okay. Then I read Little Ironies, Stories of Singapore. So this is a collection of Singaporean short stories that is written by Catherine Lim. Like, probably, well, I didn't know this before, but when I looked around, like, she's like far and away agreed to be the most important writer of short stories, like, in Singapore. And yeah, these are really good stories. I think you probably have to be Singaporean to really understand this. Or if you've like, yeah, in a way, kind of like, I would recommend it to a foreigner in the same way that I would recommend like this history book of Singapore. It's like, if you're moving to Singapore or you're interested in Singaporean culture for some reason, you should read these. Otherwise, you might miss a lot of the, I don't know, just the cultural things, like, I don't know. Or like, no, it's interesting because, a lot of these are from Singaporean Chinese perspective. I need to like, you know, there's a Singaporean Malay community that is not very well represented in here. So yeah, Singaporean Chinese perspectives on things are really well captured in this collection of short stories. I'm gonna put this quite high. Yeah, I'm gonna put it in recommended. Yeah, quite high. Let's say like around the level of The Street, or maybe around here, actually higher than Wuthering Heights. But yeah, this is like what I got out of it, and with the caveat that if you're not Singaporean, you may get a lot less out of it, and it may be just down to okay. Like, for example, the writing is not always that good. Like, it almost feels like there's a Singaporean dialect, like, or it's a language actually, Singlish, and this is not Singlish. This is, or some of the dialogue is in Singlish, but the narration's not in Singlish. Then again, some of the narration, you can feel some Singaporean isms in there that I didn't really necessarily like in the writing. Like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, like, I don't know. Some of it like snuck into the writing as well, I feel, when it wasn't like intended to. You can tell that the author definitely intended the writing to be very, like, posh, but like was overdoing it in a way so that like some big words are used, or like nice words are used, but then repeated too soon. So the result being like, if you use like a sticky word, you shouldn't use it too sticky, meaning like it'll stick in your memory because it's like an interesting word. If you use an interesting word, you shouldn't use it too soon later, because then it just seems a little bit like amateurish. That happens in this book a lot. And also the typeset, or like whoever's the editor of this book, like really dropped the ball. There's just so many typos. Like they misspell the main character's name like 3 times in one paragraph in the middle of the story. Like, I don't know how you can do that. Like, I don't know. Like, I read it once and I found like 15 errors. I don't know how an editor didn't catch all these. Yeah. So there's like problems with this book, but like honestly, the stories themselves are really good. Okay, and then the last book on the list is Bonheur d'Occasion by Gabrielle Roy. And whereas I put this other Gabrielle Roy book really low, I'm gonna have to put this really, really high. Like, I'm so glad I didn't give up on Gabrielle Roy, like, with Alexandre Chenevert, because this book is so good. Like, it's in English, it's called The Tin Flute. In French, it's called Bonheur d'Occasion, which means secondhand happiness. And it's about this poor family in a poor neighborhood of Montreal. I think now it's not a poor neighborhood anymore, but like in the 40s it was. Like, it's Saint-Henri in Montreal, which I've been to, and definitely doesn't look anything like what is described in the book. But yeah, it's around the time of the war, and it's like a huge family of like French Canadians. Like, oh, sorry, not a huge family. Like, it's not all the extended family. It's literally just like a man and his wife, but they just have way too many kids, and they're like poor, and they, like, their life is just so focused on the everyday making ends meet that like they just can't find any happiness, right? And like, they have a grown-up daughter that it focuses on her. It focuses on really the mom and the grown-up daughter the most. And it's just like tragic, and meanwhile there's a war going on, and what that war represents to these people is just like like kind of I don't know, it's just like sad, like the individual ways in which the characters try to escape poverty, and like it's like their only way out. And yeah, I guess they all like fail in their in trying to like escape the consequences of poverty. Even if they like come upon some money, it like never really solves their problem. And like I don't know. Anyway, it's just like I guess it's an exploration of poverty and class and war to a certain extent, though it never really goes into the war. It's just like the civilian aspect of like people being called to war, and like yeah, the family at home thinking about their loved ones at war and stuff like that. And it's like it's also a very Montreal novel, and someone who has lived in Montreal and loves that city, it's really interesting, and I would highly recommend it. And yeah, in English it's called The Tin Flute. So yeah, I'm gonna put this. Sorry, I haven't even put it anywhere, but I think it goes pretty high. I'm gonna put it. Yeah, around Demian, like there. Maybe even both. Okay. All right, so that's it. That's the entire tier list. This is gonna be a really long video. I'm gonna do as much editing as I can. I normally don't even edit my math videos. I just put everything in and pauses and all because it's nice in a math video to sometimes have time to think about what was just said on, or was just written down. But this is gonna have to require a lot of edits, and I'm gonna try to pare it down. The like raw footage is like over 2 hours. I hope I can get it down to something reasonable. I put all the timestamps at the bottom so you can click around. I know nobody's really going to sit down and listen to 2 hours of me talk about books. I know you're going to click around to just the books that you're interested in, but that's the point. I don't want to take up 2 hours of your time. If you really sat down and watched all 2 hours of this, or whatever it is, maybe I cut it down to like an hour plus, then thank you. I'm honored that you gave me that time, and I hope that you came away with some books that you now want to read because I recommended them. And yeah, a lot of the books, the recommended is just really high just because I enjoyed the books. If I didn't enjoy them, I probably wouldn't have finished them. And really, there weren't that many books that I really regretted reading. I don't know when the next time is that I will make another book video, but I did enjoy making this one. So, I probably will eventually. Maybe it'll be next New Year's, and I'll talk about the books I read in 2023. And until then, goodbye. It is now 3:45 a.m. and I am going to probably go to sleep and edit this tomorrow.